Hello and welcome to this edition of New Humanum. My guest today is Lois McLatchie Miller. Lois is the Communications Officer for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is an advocacy group which helps people who've fallen foul of censorship laws in various countries. Lois, welcome to New Humanum. Let me ask you first of all, I heard your speech at the NatCon, the National Conservative conference earlier this year in London. And in that you were talking about the case of a woman who was arrested for apparently praying silently outside an abortion clinic. Tell me how that story developed. I mean, it seems an extraordinary story. What's it all about?
It was quite a remarkable case in Birmingham where a charitable volunteer who has been volunteering for 20 years to support vulnerable women who would like to continue their pregnancies but need a bit of extra support to do so. And Isabel's been engaged with this work for a long time, but in her city, the local authorities imposed what's called a buffer zone, or a censorship zone really. And that is a local law which bans people from doing things that you and I could agree with that they should be banned from doing, like harassment, for example. We all stand strongly against harassment of women in any circumstance, and thank goodness it's already illegal in this country. But the buffer zones go much further and ban offers of charitable support and prayer. And in this case, if we were to believe that Isabel was guilty, it would mean they even banned silent prayer, I thought. So Isabel had stood there on the street. She didn't engage in any conversations or leaflet giving because she knew that that was now against the prohibitions of the local government. So she just simply stood there imperceptibly and stopped to pray for the women that were there and the decisions they were going to make that day. Police approached her. They asked her what she was doing. She said, "Are you praying?" And she said, "I might be praying inside my head." And that confession was the basis of an arrest that was made, that she had broken this prohibition on praying outside an abortion facility. She was dragged through the courts. Thankfully, in February, she was found innocent. We were delighted to be able to give her legal support to get that verdict. But, having been found innocent by a court, which would then give us the assumption that, okay, so it is okay to be thinking inside your head, she then went out and did the same thing again and prayed inside her head, which had been proven to be legal. And she was arrested yet again in March by 6 police officers who turned up to take her away. She's been out on bail since then. We are still waiting to hear from the authorities as to whether they will continue to prosecute her. They're going to have to make a decision within the next week or so before the time runs out, so we'll be watching that one closely.
I mean, your reference there to 1984 and George Orwell and so on, it really is quite a chilling thought that silent prayer could be considered by the law to be against the law in certain circumstances. I mean, things have come to a pretty pass if that is the case.
Yeah, that's accurate. The situation with Isabel referred to local laws, but unfortunately the Conservative government, whilst this was ongoing, they actually put in law which rolled out buffer zones across the country. Now, it hasn't come into force yet, but this means that pretty soon in the United Kingdom there will be many streets where it will be illegal to pray inside your own head, or it could be illegal, I should say, to pray inside your own head. It certainly will be illegal to pray out loud. So this is a very censorial move. It's very surprising to see from a Conservative government, which is, you would think of conservatism as conserving the right to speak freely, to express your views, to honour that history and tradition of democracy where everyone can learn from each other, have arguments and engage and still, be able to, as a civilised society, function. This really stands against that tradition. So it has been a surprising tendency of the Conservative government recently to move towards censorship and away from free speech.
Which begs the question, I mean, what's your explanation for that? I mean, as you say, we've got a government which is nominally conservative, and I think also, the way you've outlined that story, I think most British people hearing that story would be very surprised. I mean, what has happened that has enabled those sorts of local bylaws to be brought in and now, as you say, rolled out across the country? What's happened in society that should be so?
I think there's been a cultural trend towards silencing views that are perhaps out of the kind of accepted by the state realm. This issue touches the A word, abortion, because it's about free speech, but it takes place outside an abortion facility, and that's something that people feel very uncomfortable discussing. It's been an issue that we've been told for decades now that we're not allowed to discuss, and campaigners have said that the pro-life movement has no space in society to even bring up arguments about, is abortion really the best thing for women? Can we do better? Do women thrive when abortion is the dominant answer to their problems, or can we find solutions that support both the woman and the child and protect that human life and value that as well? Because those arguments have gone out of fashion and have been shoved aside, it makes it very difficult when these issues come into Parliament for MPs to speak up and speak out for the free speech of those who hold minority views.
Is it because, do you think, this is something which challenges one of the central tenets of feminism? Is that what you're up against?
That is correct in the way that some people would view feminism, or the way that the movement has been perhaps hijacked since the sexual revolution, which told us that women thrive only if they don't have children, that women can have careers and achievement and happiness and flourishing, but only if they kill their children first, which is, I think, a very anti-feminist stance to take, but it has been the one that has pervaded the culture. I think this does connect to that sentiment. But I do see, as a woman in my 20s myself, I'm often looking at social media, online, and seeing what my peers are kind of saying in response to a lot of cultural stories. And I actually see a movement in the last few years of young women starting to question this kind of narrative where, we're told that the epitome of being a successful woman is to only be kind of in an office job, generating GDP and having that kind of what some people enjoy and get success and fulfillment from, and many women would say, oh, that's not what I really want with my life. And meaning and fulfillment we have found for generations comes from relationships, and we haven't been encouraged as women or men for a long time to marry and have children and to form families, even though we know that's great for society and for individuals. So that movement, there is a lot of voices coming through and saying, hang on, what about marriage? What about families? I'm hitting my 30s, I'm hitting my 40s. This is something that I do want, but I'm almost not allowed to say it. And I think there has been a backlash in our culture against the kind of Hollywood movies that keep coming in and promoting this narrative of the girl boss. And I think, frankly, everyone's a bit tired of it and we want something more genuine.
Is feminism a difficult concept? Do you consider yourself a feminist? I mean, I'm sure you must have had this conversation a million times, actually. People ask you, are you a feminist? Are you a feminist?
No, it's a great question. It's not something I have a black and white answer for, even though I do get asked it a lot. I think why it's such a difficult question is because it means something different to everybody. Now, if we say, feminism is just merely acknowledging that women and men are of equal value, absolutely, of course. I mean, everybody of faith, I hold the Christian faith, everyone believes and acknowledges that because that's what it says in Scripture. I mean, you don't need the Christian faith to acknowledge that because it also says that in human rights law. However, if it's a feminism that actually says women are so much better than men and we don't need men in our lives and it infantilizes men, I think that's a dangerous form of feminism. It actually has a toxic effect in our culture, which has led to a backlash, quite an ugly backlash against the movement actually. Or if it's a feminism, like we discussed, if it's a feminism that says women can have it all, but they must reject family, they must reject children and husbands and all of the things that we have enjoyed as a thriving element of our life. If it's a feminism that says that we can't have that, I think that's a restrictive feminism, and I don't identify with that either. So not a clear answer, but it depends what you mean.
Yes, no, it isn't a clear answer, and I don't think there can be. The thing is, these sorts of issues are not open to simple explanations and one-line answers. I mean, the point that you raise, the way in which, for instance, the acknowledgement of the dignity and importance of each human individual is, of course, a Christian precept at the very core of Christianity. So in a way, one might assume that that feminists and Christians should be walking shoulder to shoulder in a way if it was just a question of the equal dignity of men and women. But feminism as a political movement has been taken away in a different direction, hasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
I mean, it's become quite a left-wing crusade, which in many ways is anti-family.
I would agree, and I think a lot of people have blinders on. We live in a moment where it's the culture wars and you're this tribe or that tribe, and I think those who are attracted to the word feminist and want to be a part of that movement, which seems vibrant and interesting and colourful, then have to close their eyes to all the well-based and thought-through arguments that women are making to say that actually we think that abortion is not the best thing for women, or we think that marriage is something that actually supports women to thrive in the right context. And they have blinders on to these things which are actually very pro-women, but we're often told as conservative women that we are being anti-women, which makes no sense to me. I think we should be listening to each other's points of views, not dismissing each other based on tribalism.
Let's talk about Alliance Defending Freedom. It's basically an advocacy organisation. Would that be the right description? Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're a faith-based legal advocacy group. And so we defend fundamental freedoms for everybody. That's the right to freely speak, to freely believe, the right to hold one's conscience. And we also defend life from the start to the end of life, and the right to have a family and to parent and to do all these things within the freedom context. And we do that across Europe and the world. So we have offices in Asia. We have a network of lawyers across Africa and over 4,000 lawyers across the world. And in Europe, we have a presence across the continent at major European institutions as well as here in London. And whilst all these cultures are very different and these contexts are different, we see our colleagues fight cases in Nigeria and Pakistan where Christians are on death row because they've been accused of sending a blasphemous text. We have a musician in Nigeria who is accused of blasphemy because of the lyrics of his song, and he's been on death row for years. So we have very extreme situations where we see that free speech and freedom of religion has been hampered with and has been completely destroyed in some situations. And then we have here in Europe where the circumstances and the consequences of actions are much different. So we have cases where Christians have been silenced or censored. We had a case only last week where a Finnish politician had been in court being tried on criminal charges of hate speech because she had sent a tweet questioning her church leadership's sponsorship of the Pride Parade, and she attached Bible verses to that. So the consequences of her actions, even if Päivi Räsänen, the Finnish politician, was to go to prison, she would be treated much differently to some of our clients in Nigeria and Pakistan.
Yes.
But at root, these laws which ban blasphemy or hate speech or ban any category of speech which is often used to label what is expressing a Christian belief, state censorship of that is at root the same, and it's creeping across the world. So that's why we take a global approach to this. That's why we have people working on all these different countries to protect Christians in all these different regions, and we take a culturally nuanced approach in each, but we recognize that this is a global problem and that Christians and others need to stand up and be expressing the need for free speech and protecting that right, that human right, so that all can speak freely, because that is really essential to a healthy functioning society.
You talk there about the global view, and are you saying that this is a situation which is worsening across the world, that these laws are becoming more prominent, more widespread, that this is something which is worsening generally?
I would say, well, there's nothing new under the sun, and blasphemy laws have been around for generations, and we look back to hundreds and hundreds of years ago where people were tried, hung, drawn and quartered for their beliefs in this country, across Europe and across the world. So this isn't something new, and it was certainly more violent back in the day. I think we had a reprieve after kind of the mid-20th century where human rights really became solidified and cemented and were recognized deeply across the West. But from my perspective, I see this creeped back towards blasphemy laws and back towards censorship as something very regressive. It comes in nice packaging. It comes in with things, rhetoric that says, well, we don't want anyone to be offended. We must protect each other from insult. No one should feel that they are being even attacked verbally for their identity. And of course, I don't want to be insulted. I don't want to insult anyone. And so it's very easy to get on board with these ideas. But then when we look actually about what these laws are doing, they actually are very, very restrictive and won't even be able to discuss important matters to society, like religion, like faith, like marriage, like children, like abortion, like all these issues that are hot button but so important because they affect people's everyday lives.
What's your explanation for where this is coming from? I mean, why, it's paradoxical, isn't it? Because we proclaim ourselves to be free societies. Free speech is something which is deeply rooted in our culture, and we sort of take it for granted. And yet, as you say, these new threats are appearing all the time, which seem to threaten it. So what's the explanation for that?
I think you're spot on that we take it for granted, and we've been very comfortable with our human rights protections for many years, and I've never had to fight for my human rights in the West because they've always just been apparent, and I think perhaps we've forgotten how important they are. And perhaps also the majority haven't noticed because it really is a minority that is affected. So we know from statistically, even from the census in the UK that was launched a couple of months ago, or published back in November last year, we know that Christians are now the minority group in the United Kingdom, and that's certainly true across the world. I mean, we talked about the Finnish case a few moments ago. Only about a third of Finns now would acknowledge that there is a God of some description. So really these are minority views, and perhaps because people are a little bit desensitized to Christianity in the West, it's been very cultural for a long time, it might not be on the top of people's radar that people who hold these genuine, deeply held beliefs and need to have that right to express them and to stay and to engage in conversations and put that view forward and have that as part of the fabric of a democracy, they're a bit desensitized to the fact that their rights are being trodden on because we don't notice the Christians so much. But my concern is this: even if somebody is not a Christian and the speech restrictions that apply across the West right now don't affect them, if you can do it to one belief, you can then do it to several more. If it becomes mainstreamed that it is okay to censor Christianity because the Christians are a bit strange or a bit weird, we don't really want to hear from them anyway, fine. But tomorrow it could be just as easy to say, well, we don't want to hear from gender critical feminists because we're not sure that they're correct, we're not sure that they have the right to speak anymore. And so that whole segment of society that perhaps has concerns about legislation which is trending in a direction that will have men being free to go into women's locker rooms or into rape crisis centres, or all these very reasonable beliefs that women's spaces should be protected, it could be tomorrow that they're the ones that are censored. And as this goes along, it could be more and more beliefs. So that would be my appeal to the general public, is that it might not be your beliefs today, but tomorrow it might well be. So we have to defend the free speech of everybody, or else there is free speech for nobody.
It's like that old declension, first they came for the communists, or as I saw it translated into a cartoon, first they came for the smokers. But tell me about your own personal motivation for this. So you're a Christian yourself. Is that why you got involved? I mean, this organisation, is that why you joined up?
Yeah, I always had an interest in Christian ethics and the way that interfaced with politics and keeping that space open for really important discussions in our society. And I actually began more serious thoughts about questions of life and human dignity and the things that we've been discussing through looking at surrogacy at university. I was studying an LLM in Human Rights Law, and I looked at the question of whether surrogacy was enabling the sale of children before they were born internationally. And I was looking at this question of human rights and protecting the human rights of the child in those situations, and it kind of struck me, well, if I believe that this is wrong for a child to be sold before they're born because they have human dignity and rights and a worth at that point, surely they have the rights to enjoy life, to be kept healthy and to be protected, and not to be discarded through the abortion industry, which is so prevalent in our country. So that really made me very engaged in the abortion issue, especially as a woman, a young woman who, I'm often faced with these issues amongst my peers, amongst the media that I'm reading. So I became very engaged that way, and very convinced that there was a need to be able to speak out about these topics. And as I saw that the window for being able to speak about these important issues, and remember, abortion affects 1 in 3 women, so it's a very important societal issue, I noticed that the window to speak about that issue was getting narrower, and that we needed to protect that space for everybody to speak freely and to exchange their beliefs. So that's how I grew more and more towards ADF. I got involved in some training programs that they did for young professionals, and soon found myself applying for a job. And I worked initially on the UN team and spent some time out in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, working on providing information there as the UN made policy decisions about these kinds of topics. And then 3 years ago transitioned over to work more in the media and to be speaking and talking and engaging about these things in the court of public opinion.
When you were a student, in a student context, these must have been difficult views to hold sometimes, were they? I mean, I get the impression that it's very difficult for young women particularly to break ranks on these issues surrounding abortion and surrogacy and those type of things. People become very impassioned and often quite violent in their language, don't they?
Yeah, definitely, that's true. I certainly relied a lot in that time, especially during my master's. I'd already come across some of the training programs from ADF, and that had really given me the confidence to speak. I already had the belief secured, but that gave me the tools to be able to speak about the reason for my belief. And I think that helped a lot. It does take a bit of bravery and boldness to be able to have these conversations, but I think when you do, I always found that there might be 1 or 2 quiet parties in the conversation who might then come to you later and say, oh, you know what, I think I actually agree with you, you actually have a good point, I was scared to say it myself, but I think this is actually right. So I've always found I've been the only person in the room who might have a more conservative, you might say, perspective, or a more Christian perspective, or whatever the conversation is. And so I think it just takes that little bit of getting out of your comfort zone and speaking, engaging, to give someone next to you the confidence to do it next time. And then as these things grow and build, there'll be more and more voices, and that Overton window is more open to have these conversations.
Tell me about your own Christianity. Are you a Cradle Christian? What's the sort of or did you come to it and are you because your family's Christian? What's the?
I'm an evangelical, so we don't even believe in Cradle Christians. So I turned away from my life of sin at 5 years old, and my parents were Christians and they raised me in the faith. We were never particularly politically engaged. It wasn't, something that our family were very interested in. We would watch the evening news, but we wouldn't therefore kind of think about our faith in any sort of societal or political way, but more of in a personal way, and engaging in reading the Bible and praying regularly. It was when I was older, probably at university, and was looking at these things, that I started to look at how, I had this kind of perception that my faith was about salvation for me, which is absolutely correct, and for spreading that good news of the gospel to everyone else, and that is definitely a priority. But I think I had missed that the Christian faith also calls for the redemption of creation as a whole, that this Christian worldview spills not only into sharing the good news with everybody that there is salvation available, but that the concepts of truth and of life and of redemption was something that could help, with alleviate poverty in our country. That those principles for generations have inspired great politicians like William Wilberforce to overturn the slave trade. And it's been Christian principles that have embedded human rights into society, which is something that is so important today and has always been. And that principle of human equality as well, which is sometimes misused today, but that principle of human equality is fundamentally a Christian principle. So redeeming and restoring culture in line with that view, I realized was actually a really important part of our faith, and that's why I became engaged, which helped me to have a kind of broader view of the world of how can Christianity actually help and serve my neighbors around me.
And in terms of confessional allegiance, are you Presbyterian, Catholic?
Yeah, so I grew up actually in a more conservative kind of evangelical church, and I now attend an Anglican church here in London. But in terms of, I've never been entirely comfortable with labels, whereas so I tend to think of myself, or try to follow more of a kind of a mere Christianity model, where...
Yes, so but because of course your reliance, the work you do, it must be very apparent to you that these are not the sole preserves of Catholics or of any other particular Christian group. In fact, these ideas you're talking about, these campaigns that you're involved with, these are supported by a whole range of Christian belief systems, and also by, of course, many Muslims would be with you on the abortion thing, wouldn't they?
That's right, many would. So ADF International is actually an ecumenical organisation. We have Catholics and evangelicals and Orthodox and all manner of Christians who would ascribe to the Nicene Creed. Would join together and work on these issues that we have in common, because we found that working as an alliance, that's in our name, Alliance Defending Freedom, is so much stronger. And we carry that into our work as well when we're out in the field. So we will unite with anybody who agrees with us on one issue, even if they don't agree with us on everything else. So on surrogacy, for example, we might find that there are many radical feminists who want to work with us because they can see that this is detrimental to women's health and women's rights, and we agree. So we can work on that with them, and the next day we might be talking about abortion. They might disagree with us, but we think it's absolutely right to work as an alliance where you can to achieve the impact which is best for everybody in the country.
So it is an American, or it started in America, didn't it? Is that where how does it, how do you function? Where do you get the money from? How do you keep going?
Sure, well, we're a donor-based organisation. You're right, the original Alliance Defending Freedom, the oldest one, is in the States in America. ADF International is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, and that's where all the international work flows from in all our international offices. So we're donor funded. We rely on support from those who appreciate our work, and there's a website where people might like to visit if they would like to support our work at adfinternational.org. But yeah, it's really through generosity that we are able to take these cases forward, and we seek to be very strategic in the work that we do, in that we will take cases that will have an impact not only for the person in the middle of the case, but for wider society. So making sure that the cases we take will defend freedom of speech for everybody, defend the right to life for everybody, etc.
And do you feel you're making progress?
That's a really good question. I think so, in that looking across the world, and that trend that we were speaking about of censorship towards Christians, it can be easy to despair and see the walls are coming in and what's the future going to look like. I think our Christian worldview gives a lot of confidence in the future, but also I can see, whilst these problems are growing, the awareness of these problems is also growing. So I take a lot of comfort and encouragement from that whilst I was horrified to see that we would have thought crimes in the United Kingdom and people being arrested for their silent prayers. I was also encouraged to see that not only Christians, but a wide manner of engaged public figures across Twitter and all the other places where they now congregate were also calling out these laws in a way that I don't think we would have seen maybe 10 years ago. So I think that's healthy and that's exciting and interesting. And the more that we can share news about these issues, these cases, these laws that are coming in, the more we'll be able to generate a movement which does protect free speech for everyone.
Battle is joined. Lois, thanks very much indeed for being on New Humanum. It's been most interesting, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
And to you, thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed watching this interview, and I hope you have, and you'd like to see more of this kind of work, you might care to consider making a small donation. If you go to our website, newhumanum.org, and follow the links, you'll find a donation page. Anything you can give us would be gratefully received.